Welcome to the Channel 19 Experience Trucker Podcast. This is where the real stories roll, straight from the blacktop.
Breaker, 19 villains, you got your ears on. Turn that squelch down and the volume up. You're tuned in to the Channel 19 Experience Trucker Podcast. I'm your host, Tony. It's Saturday, October 12th, and this is episode number 32. I'm back from England. My shoulder's healing well, and I've got some perspective that you can only get from standing in places where history actually happened. From Villa Park to Lincoln Cathedral, from Roman arches to medieval documents, I spent a couple weeks watching patterns that have been rhyming for 800 years. We're kicking off this week with the song I Can't Lose You from the Broadway version of the Disney musical Frozen. A song about the war between needing isolation and craving connection. Sounds like a trucker ballad if I've ever heard one. And switching from Disney back to trucking, and there's a little bit of salt mixed in this episode that I'll only use once and then I'll abbreviate it from here on out. This week we'll look at the patterns that have been repeating for 800 years, how elite deals get celebrated while common needs get forgotten, how some relationships remember sacrifice while others externalize it. And now for the salty bit, how big fucks small and then rewrites the history to make it sound like progress. And speaking of patterns that rhyme, here are 3 quotes to frame today's journey. Mark Twain said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." Santayana warned, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." I'm sure you've heard that one before. And then James Allen observed, "The oak sleeps in the acorn." Patterns, memory, and seeds that take centuries to grow. That's what we're tracking today. On the bulletin board, we'll look at how delivering at 12 p.m. is too late now. We'll ride along with Matt Rayner through 15 hours of British trucking, where skipping lunch isn't about compliance. It's about a covenant, where both sides remember, so both sides last. I stand in Lincoln Cathedral's attic, seeking the hidden infrastructure that keeps beauty standing for 900 years. And next door, I visit the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest, learning why we celebrate elite agreements while forgetting common rights. And my trip to England ended up at Runnymede, where American lawyers built a memorial to limiting power while benefiting from that same power. From Ironbridge, where different math was possible, to Westminster, where big still screw small, I've been collecting rhymes that echo from 1215 to 2025, so let's get into it. A quick shout out to Matt Rayner and Cuts Transport for letting me into their world. And speaking of Matt, he's on vacation right now, as only a trucker would do it. He flew into Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, rented an RV, and is spending the next 3 weeks driving across Canada over to Halifax, Nova Scotia. One of his first messages to me after getting started on his journey: "I have severely underestimated just how big this country is." I should have done that in his accent. It would have been funnier. Brother, you've driven across England, you've driven a truck to Russia, and you underestimated Canada? Well, North America will have a way of doing that to you. We'll check in with him along his journey over the next couple weeks. Don't forget to hang around for the post-trip. I'll tell you about standing where King John failed and why that failure was actually a seed. If they can ignore agreements from 1215, we can certainly question agreements from 2025. We've got work to do. If you're not driving, it's a great time to like, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends.
Paper breaker 19, can I get a radio check? Pretty quiet out here on Channel 19. There's a plain white rapper taking pictures at the state line. Hit the jake brake quick, we ain't paying no fines. The driver swing into the interstate, body shop south at exit 5. Building trucking ain't the same as it was. We're the last of our kind.
At the Mid-America Truck Show, I had the fortune to meet up with Mike Barber, founder of Truckers Wealth. Both of us have a passion for understanding the uniqueness of truckers and sharing our knowledge wherever we can. Mike is a seasoned financial professional. He has over 20 years of dedicated experience serving the trucking industry. Truckers Wealth has created a specialized financial hub where truckers can receive expert advice and tailored solutions to build wealth, minimize taxes, and secure lifetime income for themselves and their families. Check out his website, truckers-wealth.com, and look forward to seeing him on the program here soon. Grab that safety vest. It's time for the pre-trip. Hey, villains, let's start off the episode with the song of the week. Last night, I found myself sitting in the Phoenix Theater, surrounded by 3 generations of my family, my wife, my daughter, and my granddaughter, watching Frozen, the musical. And somewhere between the laughter and the lights, a Disney song hit me harder than any country ballad has in a while. The song is I Can't Lose You, and it's a duet between 2 sisters, the main characters in the musical. I'll share a link to the song on Facebook. And what struck me most about the song, and really about Elsa's entire character in the musical, was how it mirrors something a lot of us in trucking understand but rarely talk about. Elsa sings, "Standing frozen in this life I've chosen, please don't find me, the past is all behind me, leave me in the snow, let me go." And later she says, "I'm at home here, out in the cold, up in the air, but it turns all to chaos near people I love." As someone on the autism spectrum, I've always needed a way to engage with the world that felt safe. And if we're being honest here, and I hope this is a safe space here on the podcast, it's something that I still struggle with. And trucking gave exactly what I needed. That cab became my ice palace, a place where I could control the variables and face the world in measured doses. But sitting there in that theater with my family, I realized I wasn't just relating to Elsa. I was relating to them both Elsa and Anna. The song captures that internal dialogue that so many of us have, that we have that same voice inside us that craves isolation and also longs for connection. And in my marriage especially, learning how to be a good husband, how to communicate successfully, how to manage frustration without hurting others. I've lived that push and pull for years. When I fail at it, I crave the road, the isolation of that palace or cage. And when I'm lonely, after days or weeks on the road, I crave connection with anybody. One voice in that song says, "Don't you see that I'm the storm and you make it worse? I'd fix it, but I don't know how." While Anna whispers, "Why can't you open that door?" The part that says, "Don't find me," is at war with the part that's begging, "Please don't give up on me." And that's something that I think a lot of drivers can relate to. The safety of solitude versus the fear of being too far gone for connection. This week Will Cook interviewed me for his platform, and we talked about how a lot of folks in trucking find comfort in solitude. And whether it's neurodivergence, trauma, or just needing space, the cab gives us that need for control and quiet is what subconsciously led me into the driver's seat. But it's bigger than just my story. Over the years, I've dealt with thousands of drivers, tens of thousands of interactions. And I've come to believe that there's a lot more neurodivergence in this community than anybody realizes. And even beyond that, the job itself breeds isolation. The lifestyle shapes the mind. And trucking's always been a refuge for people rebuilding, escaping, or just trying to find a version of life that makes sense again. And we also see it now in the rise of women in trucking. Single mothers, people escaping trauma, folks who embrace that steel cage around them and the freedom to be 500 miles away from their problems. This industry doesn't care where you came from. Can you drive the truck? Can you deliver on time? Can you handle being alone? And even the truck itself offers a kind of safe relationship. You learn how the truck works, how to treat the truck right, and it responds. Safe, consistent, even giving you audible and visual cues when it's not happy. And most days that's a lot easier to understand, diagnose, and fix than our human counterparts ever will be. Now you can admit it. I'll admit it. Remember This is our safe space. You've patted that dash or hood and talked to that truck softly, sometimes pleading, sometimes encouraging. After you've fixed whatever was wrong with it, you've said, "Isn't that better, old girl? We've got work to do." But there's a deeper message. And what makes I Can't Lose You so powerful for our community is that it doesn't pretend isolation is simply good or bad. It admits that sometimes we need those walls, whether they're made of ice in the musical or a cab of a Peterbilt. And it also recognizes the pain of that separation and the yearning for connection that still lives under it. The old CB culture, the truck stop coffee counters, at least gave us a few minutes of real human connection. Now with social media, drivers can be even more isolated, getting their social interactions through screens that often amplify frustration instead of community. We're all Elsas, creating our own storms, and we need our Annas to help us try to understand. And that's what this song reminds me, that even inside the storm, sometimes the storm I've created, we still want to be seen. Isolation can be necessary, but it's also painful. It's protective, but it's limiting. And for those of us who found trucking as a way to manage our differences, it's okay to acknowledge both voices inside us. And maybe the real message isn't choosing between being Elsa or Anna, but learning to honor both, to build boundaries that keep us safe while leaving room for people who are willing to stand outside our ice palaces and sing, "I Can't Lose You." Now, keep an eye out for Will's content in the upcoming weeks about our talk on his page, A Driver's Perspective. We dove into what happens to us as the nature and viability of being a trucker keeps changing, and I'm interested to hear his take. That conversation actually led me to write more about neurodivergence in trucking. I'll drop a link to that blog post on Facebook too if you want to dig deeper into this topic. So this week, as you're rolling down the highway in your own kingdom of isolation, give the song a listen. And remember, you're not alone, feeling alone. Now, I know it's a little bit different and not the usual fare to talk Disney musicals and trucking, but pieces of us show up everywhere. Sometimes someone else just finds the words for feelings that we can't name. So next time you're home with the people who matter, watch Frozen or anything that resonates with them, and let it be a bridge between your world and theirs. You know, our stories tend to smell like diesel and start with, "You're not going to believe this." And movies like Frozen give us a shared language to meet in the middle. So maybe that's the homework assignment, learning when to roll solo and when to let someone ride shotgun through the storm. All right, villains, let's jump over to the bulletin board. We've got 3 quotes this week that'll frame up everything we're going to discuss today. First up, Mark Twain supposedly said this one: "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." Now, whether he said it or not, it just sounds like something he would have said. But whoever said it understood something fundamental. Patterns echo across time. The beats may change, but the rhythm stays the same. And we're going to hear some of those rhymes today, from 1215 to 2025, from King John to modern trucking. Now, the second quote comes from George Santayana, a Spanish-American philosopher who spent his life studying how civilizations rise and fall. He wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." He died in 1952, having seen his warning ignored twice. He watched the world stumble into World War I and then watched them repeat the same mistake again in World War II. And finally, James Allen, a British philosopher from the early 1900s, gave us this: "The oak sleeps in the acorn." He believed that everything begins as a thought, a seed before it becomes reality. And sometimes what looks like failure is just a seed that hasn't sprouted yet. Sometimes defeat is just victory that needs a little more time to grow. So that's our framework for today: historical patterns that rhyme, the cost of forgetting those patterns, and the seeds hidden in apparent failures. With that in mind, let's talk about a Reddit post that I found. And this Reddit post, it hit a little close to home. The title of the Reddit post was called "Delivering at 12 p.m. is too late now?" A driver said, "Dispatch hit me up angry today because I delivered a load late at noon. The delivery window was until 4. And then the crowd jumped in, blaming dispatch. If they knew the window, it was on them." Others said, "By noon, all the good loads are gone." And somewhere in the middle, I tried to split the difference with my quote, "You're not wrong, they're not wrong. Sometimes this is just what happens. The key is communication." And then someone else, Twisted Fister, fired back and said, "If the window's known 24 hours ahead of time, it's all on dispatch." And he's right from one angle. If you deliver within the window, you didn't fail. But that doesn't mean that the system didn't underperform. Because in this business, it's not just about being on time. It's about making time pay. And by noon, the freight board had changed. On-time delivery might still cost everybody money. But then again, there's more that we don't know. Is dispatch even seeing their real hours? Or is dispatch flying blind because the driver's on paper logs? We didn't have that context. Is the carrier's freight density thin, meaning there's not much to choose from after lunch in that area? Was this a live unload that eats up half the day? Or is the driver running split sleeper, which adds flexibility but also confusion? And now both sides are guessing wrong about what the plan really is. Now, the reality is everybody is trying to make money in this game. Nobody's trying to fail. But poor communication guarantees a suboptimal result. And that's your call to action this week. Communicate. Communication and accountability go hand in hand. Now, maybe the carrier is a clown show. Who knows? But if it smells off, find out. Call them up. Lay out what you're doing, what you expect, what they can count on from you. Or put it in the messages if you feel more comfortable with it being on the record. I'm not trying to defend the carrier or the driver. If they're good at what they do, they'll appreciate it. If they're bad at it, at least you'll know what you're dealing with. Either way, you'll learn if you can trust the plan or if you need to go find a new one. All this technology doesn't necessarily result in clarity. Just because they can see your hours doesn't mean they do, doesn't mean they look, doesn't mean they know what they're even looking at. Don't assume that they know what you're doing. Over communicate because your wallet depends on it. And if noon is too late in their world, maybe it's time to find one that runs on logic instead of blaming. I'm going to do something curious this week, potentially exciting, perhaps moronic. I'm going to post a link to the episode back in this Reddit forum. So if anyone wants to talk about it some more in an interview, they can. Or if you want to talk about it and tell me I'm an idiot or whatever's the case, reach out. Stay tuned for the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. Now, finally on to the pre-trip. Let me tell you a little bit about my 15-hour ride-along with Matt Rayner over in England last week. I got to see UK trucking, but it also reminded me about relationships and the difference between contracts and covenants. My time with Matt actually started the day before, on Sunday, at Villa Park in Birmingham, home of our favorite English Premier League football team, Aston Villa. I had invited Matt over, and we had some hospitality seat tickets up in the Holt End. That's the loud, rowdy section where all the real Villa faithful sit. We gave up a goal in the first 2 minutes, and then we stormed back to win 3-1. The place was going absolutely mental, mostly out of relief that we don't suck as badly as maybe we thought we did. It was a fun experience. And then Matt gave me a ride over to Lincoln for my home base for the next few days. And Matt gave me a ride in his 1990s Lincoln Marquis. He had a left-hand drive American car, and we were driving on the left-hand side driving of British roads. Quite an experience. But that's Matt for you. Doing things his way, making it work, having some fun in the process. Now, it all started off quite early on Monday morning. Wake up alarm at 2:30. Matt meets me outside the Airbnb at 3 o'clock. It's that universal trucker's hour out there when the world belongs to us and the freight that needs moving. At the yard, trucks are fueling up, drivers doing pre-trips in the dark. One guy's fighting with a brake light, needs to replace the whole component just to fix a bulb. Everything's componentized now, nothing simple. Well, maybe simple for the engineer who designed it, and the part system that only manages one component now and not a dozen. Sound familiar? And Matt had inserted his tachograph card earlier in the process before all the pre-trip work. That's the British ELD system. The card goes with Matt, not the company. Every move gets recorded, no gray area, no fudging. If that truck moves with Matt's card in it, even if it's just 100 yards, it's going into drive status, period. So we're picking up at the port near Grimsby, Immingham specifically, and then hauling some copper tubing down to Coventry. It's about a 3-hour run, give or take, with traffic. We hook on to one of those modular European style trailers, curtain sides, retractable roof like a Conestoga, can be configured about 6 different ways. Really makes you wonder why we don't have more versatility like these trailers here. It's pretty cool setup. And now we're off and running. We go down to the port, grab our trailer, get out of there, and we're headed on the highway. And we're going about 50, 55 miles an hour. And everybody's governed kind of in that range of 55, 56 miles an hour. We were taking a lot of 4-lane motor highways to get to Coventry, trucks staying in the outer 2 lanes. Yeah, you get some elephant racing with everyone going roughly the same speed, but not as much as I would expect. Drivers were pretty courteous for the most part, flashing lights to each other, knocking down the crews a little bit to help people pass and keep the traffic flowing. Matt was exceptionally courteous to everyone, but he said not everybody is, and we can relate to that. Now, it's interesting, they've got plenty of regulations over there too. And you've also got driving hours overlapping with labor laws, something that for the most part in trucking in America, we basically just solved that problem by exempting truck drivers from all the other labor laws, except in a few instances. Now, it seemed complex to me because I was trying to wrap my mind around all the different words and acronyms and the implications of some of the scenarios that Matt was describing. But let's face it, it was probably complex. Now, after so many hours, because of this overlap between labor and trucking regulations, you must take a break. You can't just drive, drive, drive. You need 45 minutes of break total. And I think that expands too, depending on how long you work. And it can be split into different configurations, like 15 and 30-minute segments. But there's various rules about when and how you can do that. It's not just about hours of service, it's about the worker's rights to rest and meals. Kind of similar to some of the California or West Coast meal and break provisions that we have here in the United States. If you're not familiar with those, be thankful. Now, something else struck me about British roads. They've got these smart motorways with gantries overhead, lots of signs. The hard shoulder can become a live lane when needed. Green arrows mean it's open, red X means it's closed, or for parking or emergency use only. They've been doing this type of thing for years, and we're just starting to propose similar systems in America. And the Facebook comments describing these new flexible systems are spirited, let's say. They've also got laybys, parking cutouts right off the motorway where trucks can take their mandatory breaks. Now, these laybys, as you can imagine, could be risky spots to park. You've got traffic whizzing by at essentially full speed. There is a little space between them, but they're kind of like officially letting you park on something akin to the on-ramp, but it's paved and marked, and it's not as Wild West as the American truckers parking on and on ramps or gravel areas on the PA Turnpike, for example. The nice part is that at least there's some level of infrastructure in the country that's trying to acknowledge that trucks need a place to park. Now, also on these gantries, there's tons of speed cameras. That's just part of the landscape in England, but also in Europe, all over the place, right? Permanent cameras looking at vehicle speed all over the place. Now, Matt had a TomTom GPS and trucker directions, and that thing was beeping constantly, letting him know that there were upcoming cameras. And the result of all this? Consistent traffic flow. It wasn't trying to be sneaky. There's nothing sneaky about it. There's big ass signs everywhere telling you that speed cameras are coming up, and they're coming up all the time. So everybody knows you need to play reasonably close to the rules, or there's a chance you're going to get a citation in the mail. And yes, it's different from American perspectives of where speed prevails and speeds vary wildly. But It's just different math. They've chosen infrastructure needs, the ability to place cameras, and the outcomes that produces over Wild West. I'm not saying either one's right or wrong, but they produce very different outcomes in the real world. And if you look at some of the statistics for crashes between our two countries, and there's lots of ways to split it up, right? Miles driven, trucking miles driven, all kinds of things, right? I mean, it's not apples to apples. I totally acknowledge that. But there's some pretty startling differences when it comes to crashes, severity of crashes, fatalities in crashes between our two countries. And it's just something for us to keep thinking about. So we make our way down to Coventry, which is down just southeast of Birmingham, and we've got to wait for a bay. The whole place down there looked like it was kind of designed by an American architect for left-hand driving trucks. But Matt's in a right-hand driving truck, and so there was a lot of finagling to get from the kind of the bullpen or the staging area into the dock, get pointed in the right direction to back up so he could be able to see what he's doing and not have to do a blindside back into a building. But he got it all done masterfully. Well done, Matt. And he got it into the bay, collapsed the roof in towards the front of the truck. And then they brought in their overhead crane system and lifted out the various bundles and put them in their appropriate piles inside the giant warehouse. Very efficient. And now here's where the story kind of starts to get interesting. Our next stop is to go pick up a partial load over in Droitwich, which is probably a little more than an hour southwest of where we were. So now we're down southwest of Birmingham. A couple of pallets of portable heating stoves that we picked up there. Really tight spot to get into. I've got a video I'll post on Facebook. There's no way an American truck was getting in there without taking out some bushes and leaving some paint behind. But Matt threaded it through there and got himself all sorted without leaving any paint anywhere. So well done, Matt. The plan was to grab them, head back north, stop at a service plaza for lunch and our second required break, and then mosey back to the yard. But the math started to get complicated, as it often does, as you get further into the day. You see, British drivers, they get 3 long days per week where they can extend their work hours beyond the usual time frame. But you have to use them wisely. And it's Monday, the start of the work week for Matt. And he's planning to fly to Vancouver on Saturday for a 3-week vacation, driving the RV across Canada, like I mentioned before, from Vancouver to Halifax, Nova Scotia. So as we're heading back, Matt does the math. And if we stop for lunch and take that other break, we'll be pushing over the short day time frame into the long day territory. And that would burn one of his 3 long days for the week. And we'd only be going slightly over, like maybe by a half hour, or not even a half hour, maybe like 15 minutes over. But if we skip lunch, skip the bathroom break, and hustle back, we can keep Monday as a regular day. That leaves Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday all available as long days for whatever the carrier Cuts Transport might need. Matt looks at me and asks, "What do you want to do?" And now here's the other part of that equation that you have to know about. Matt's on salary, not hourly like most British drivers, not mileage like Americans, salary. So he could easily be thinking, screw it, I get paid the same either way. Let's take our time. Use up one of these long days by 15 minutes, and that means I can't be asked to do a longer one later. Pure self-interest says, take the break. But that's not how Matt sees it. In fact, he didn't even really mention it. He was thinking about the relationship with Cuts Transport, about flexibility for the company, about being available when they need him, about maintaining something beyond a transaction that is based on self-interest first. I said, you make the trucker decision, Matt. You're the boss. So we skip lunch and preserve that flexibility. So our meal for the day, some pink candy things that Matt had. They're like Starburst, but only better. So we had that and some Pepsi and some energy drinks. We held our bladders, ignored our stomachs, and made it back to keep Monday as a regular day. When we get back to the yard and I meet the other Matt, one of the owners of Cuts Transport, he's in the office juggling phone calls, cutting up with the brokers, insulting them while they insult him back, everyone laughing. the interpersonal relationship that makes logistics fun. Now, I've been both Matts in my life, the driver Matt and the dispatcher Matt, and I miss both parts. And watching them interact, hearing the banter, seeing the genuine enjoyment in solving the daily puzzle of logistics together, that's when it hit me. That's what a real relationship is about. Not a contract, not something lawyers got involved with that you whip out when it's convenient or your feelings get hurt. Not something that you break when it suits you and try to force the issue of who's really got leverage. But a covenant. When Matt the driver was preserving flexibility for Matt the owner. When Matt the owner remembers what Matt the driver does for him too. Both sides holding the sacrifice in memory. And this is the thing that we can lose at times in trucking, especially when the scale grows, like we've seen in America. When everything becomes transactional, when it's all about immediate self-interest, when nobody remembers what anybody else does for anybody, the whole system breaks down. You get drivers maximizing their personal outcome, companies maximizing theirs, and nobody thinking about the relationship itself. Matt and Cuts Transport have something different. Call it a covenant if you want to get biblical about it. I like that word. It means something special. Whatever you call it, it's what makes these companies work. While we see the metrics of large companies and how self-interest churns through people and drivers and dispatchers and everybody else fighting over the terms in that contract. That's not to say that this doesn't exist in American trucking. It does. I know people personally, my brother, Danger Dave, Mara Elliott, Will Cook, who talk about their relationships with the people that they work for and how much that matters to them. So it's still there, but it's gradually been eroding for larger and larger numbers of people. And it's not just in trucking, sadly, but in many things in American life. It's transactional. It's self-interested. It's a contract at best. So that lunch that we didn't eat or those bathroom breaks that we skipped, it wasn't about compliance. It wasn't about the regulations. Yeah, they influenced the decision, but it was about remembering the relationship and how to make the good of the whole matter. And that sort of thing, you earn it by giving and showing that you're willing to think about more than just yourself. But it also gets maintained by the mutual reciprocity that goes on over time and people not breaking that covenant, right? Covenants matter when they get upheld. When they don't get upheld, it degrades into contracts. So we worked our way back to the terminal, had a great day. Matt dropped me off at my Airbnb on a place called Steep Hill. And let me tell you, Steep Hill is not a joke. It earns every vertical foot of that name. I walked up and down it a few times. There's two parts to Lincoln, or at least in that area. I mean, there's more than two parts, but two kind of unique areas. There's the uphill and then there's the downhill. The uphill has the castle and the cathedral, and the downhill has the main downtown city area with shops and malls and trains and other things that are more well suited to the flat ground in the valley and not the top of the hill. But in between them lies Steep Hill. I spent the week exploring what's in Lincoln, and Matt went back to his routes. And what I found there in Lincoln directly connects to what I saw in his truck. But I'm going to share more of that in the drive line. I can't thank Matt and Cuts Transport enough for letting me into their world, sharing that shift with me. It was really fun and warmed my heart to be a part of it, if only for a day. And that's our pre-trip for this week. If you spot a defect, let me know. Get that seat adjusted. Let's push the buttons in. We've got work to do. Trans-Carolina Permits is based out of North Carolina. They've been in business since 1977, and they've got a team with a ton of experience in all of our favorite part of trucking, which of course is the government. They provide a portfolio of services for the trucking industry, not to mention they have a compliance program. They'll help you with clearinghouse setup and queries, IFTA and mileage reporting, so your state-by-state mileage, your fuel purchase tracking, and get that wrapped up into a nice little bundle for quarterly filings. They're a one-stop shop for your trucking needs. You can find them on Facebook and LinkedIn, or check out their website, transcarolinapermits.com. or give them a call at 1-800-899-4870.
It's by truckers for truckers. This is the Channel 19 Experience. Let's hit the road.
Welcome back, villains. Let's flip that turn signal on and drop the hammer in the drive line this week. I'm going to tell you about what I found in England, but not exactly in the order I found it. I spent a couple weeks there wandering around, and it's a lot to digest. And what made sense wandering around doesn't necessarily make sense for how to tell the story. So let me rearrange some of the pieces to show you a little bit of the pattern. And let's start off the trip down memory lane where I just left off in Lincoln. A couple-hour train ride north of London. I spent a couple days there after my ride along with Matt, taking in the castle and the cathedral, up and down that bloody steep hill. And on Tuesday, I was at Lincoln Castle, where I finally saw the document everyone celebrates, but nobody really understands. A Lincoln Castle has one of only 4 surviving copies of the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, from 1225. It sits in this underground stone vault they built specifically for it, climate-controlled, low lighting, reverential like it's a holy relic. And in a way it is. This is the mythology of freedom, right here on this 800-year-old piece of animal skin. Tourists shuffle through, looking at the faint and tiny handwritten document, buying gift shop replicas. The plaque talks about the foundation of liberty and limiting tyrannical power. And that's all true, sort of. But here's what they don't emphasize. This was never about your freedom. It was about 25 barons forcing King John to give them a better deal. On June 15, 1215, in a Runnymede meadow just southwest of what is now Heathrow Airport, King John, he's been taxing the barons into the ground to fund his failed wars in France. The barons have rebelled, they've captured London, and they forced King John to the negotiating table. And the result was the Magna Carta. Now let's be clear, the Magna Carta was revolutionary for its time. The idea that even a king had to follow rules, that power had limits, that there could be accountability, that was a radical concept in 1215. But this wasn't about universal freedom. The Magna Carta isn't some universal declaration of human rights. It's a deal between elites about how to split the pie. The commoners, the serfs, the actual workers, they're not even mentioned except as property. Article 2 talks about the inheriting estates together with all its men. The men are property being inherited, like the horses and the gold. And here's what happens next. King John signs it, then immediately tries to wiggle out of it. He went to the Pope. He got it annulled. Civil war breaks out. Most of the barons who forced him to sign it were dead within a year. John himself dies in October of 1216, barely a year after signing it. And by any immediate measure, the Magna Carta had failed. But here's why it matters. The idea survived, or some small ideas within it survived. The principle that power could be limited, that rulers could be held to written terms, that seed got planted. Even though it failed initially, it kept getting reissued, reinterpreted, expanded. It became the seeds for things the barons had never imagined: habeas corpus, due process, constitutional limits on government. And here's where it gets interesting. John's dead. His 9-year-old son, King Henry III, is now in charge, and the regents overseeing him are running England, and they need to keep the barons from revolting again. So they reissue a revised Magna Carta in 1217. But alongside of it came another document called the Charter of the Forest. This Charter of the Forest is sitting right next to the Magna Carta in that vault at Lincoln Castle. Have you ever heard of it? I didn't think so. Neither had I. This is the one that actually gave common people rights: the right to gather firewood, to graze animals, to forage for food on common land. For medieval peasants, this was survival itself. The Charter of the Forest mattered more to actual human beings than the Magna Carta ever did. But we don't celebrate it. There's no memorial at Runnymede for the second document. In fact, I can't recall where it was actually signed. I'm not sure if it was even signed at Runnymede. I'll have to look it up. But we celebrate this elite deal and forget the People's Charter. Is that starting to sound familiar? Think about every ATA victory announcement, every new regulation that's supposed to help drivers announced by a regulatory body, every deal between government and large interests that gets celebrated as progress. That's Magna Carta energy. Elites negotiating with elites, claiming it's for everybody's benefit. Meanwhile, what drivers actually need, predictable pay, reasonable hours, respect for the work, that's Charter of the Forest stuff. And just like in 1217, it gets forgotten while we celebrate the deals between the powerful. Now, let's wander off the path a little bit for a moment. Remember that salty section I told you about? Well, here it is. I'm going to go back to something from Birmingham that I'm reminded of in all of this as I was walking around Lincoln Castle in the TV show Peaky Blinders that I've mentioned before. And if you haven't watched it, watch it. It's fantastic. Watch it with subtitles if you struggle with the accent. But the accent's part of the fun of it. Plus, they're from Birmingham, and that's not that much of an accent anyway. So anyway, in the TV show, one of the main characters is Alfie Solomons. He's a Jewish gang leader from London. He's played by a fantastic actor, Tom Hardy. And he has this philosophy that he shares with Tommy Shelby, the main gang leader from Birmingham of the Peaky Blinders. Before a boxing match, Alfie finds Tommy and he drops this line of wisdom: big screws small. Crude, but it's the most honest description of power dynamics I think I've ever heard. Now, Alfie's talking about his nephew who's fighting Bonnie Gold in the ring, but he's also talking about the mafia, the Italian mafia, that's coming for the Peaky Blinders. And he's warning Tommy and justifying the betrayal that he's about to commit. Because if big screws small and the mafia is bigger than Tommy, then Alfie's just following the natural order by selling Tommy out. But here's the beautiful part. Tommy learns the lesson. He reflects on Alfie's warning and he realizes if big screws small, then I need to find someone bigger. So he made a deal with Al Capone, who's bigger than the Shangretta family from the Italian mafia world of New York. And standing in Lincoln Castle, looking at the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest, I realized we're looking at the same game. King John was big until the barons got together and became bigger. And then John found the Pope, who was bigger still. And then they all screwed the commoners because nobody was even thinking about them. 800 years later, same mathematics. Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. This is the rhyme scheme. Big accumulates power, small fights back. Big changes the rules. The big interests in the trucking industry understand this. They got big, they screw small. But drivers keep thinking appeals to fairness or logic are going to matter. They don't. Big screws small. The only question is, how do small become big? That's what the barons figured out in 1215. That's what Tommy Shelby figured out with Al Capone in Peaky Blinders. And for a little while, truckers figured it out. The Teamsters figured it out. And these days, we're still trying to figure it out with groups like OOIDA. And it's what we're going to need to figure out together once again. So looking at both those documents side by side, you realize we're still fighting the same fight. Every labor law, every worker's right, every protection we have, they're all children of that failed agreement at Runnymede. Not because the Magna Carta worked, but because it showed that power could be challenged, although it might take 800 years to mean anything. The trucking industry keeps signing new Magna Cartas, deals between the big power interests and the governments that keep promising to fix anything. Meanwhile, we're still waiting around for our Charter of the Forest, the one that actually recognizes drivers as human beings, not just resources. So that's a little bit of truth about the Magna Carta. In a way, it's a monument to freedom, like an acorn is to an oak tree. What it's really a monument of is how long it took to get from that acorn of the Magna Carta to the oak tree of the things that we have today, and how we're still fighting to maintain those things even now. One of the branches of that oak tree was the Charter of Rights in Canada, the one that Chris Barber, Tamara Leach, and others thought protected them in the Freedom Convoy. And we got a verdict this week, and I'll talk about that more a little bit later, and we'll catch up with Chris at some point. But they had to go to court for many years, many trips to Ottawa. The Crown spent tens of millions of dollars, or $10 million. And what was really at stake was, do those agreements mean anything? When the temptation of power to corrupt them and reduce those covenants to contracts that lawyers battle over, when the sentiment seems rather obvious of what was intended. Next up, I'm going to tell you what's standing right next to that castle, Lincoln Cathedral, where I learned what it really takes to maintain something for 900 years. So let's go across the road, down the street a little bit, and visit Lincoln Cathedral. It's now Wednesday, and I signed up for the rooftop tour at Lincoln Cathedral. But another spoiler alert, it's not a rooftop tour. We didn't make it to the roof. We made it to the attic, the space between the lead roof plates and all those beautiful vaulted ceilings that everybody photographs. And I'll share a bunch of pictures about it that I took both in the cathedral and up in the attic. Up there in the attic, it's just timber and medieval engineering that nobody really gets to see. It's that hidden infrastructure that keeps this thing standing. And it's amazing. It's really a marvel. And even people have studied it since and really like to try to replicate something like that. We're not sure exactly how we would complete the math to do what they did, how they did it. It's phenomenal. We know how we would do it in our own construction terms today and support that kind of weight and do all kinds of wonderful things that we do with architecture. But how they did it and managed to do it, nearly 1,000 years ago is still somewhat baffling to us, which is pretty amazing. And now they've got lasers up there to monitor how these ancient beams are shifting or moving over time. Modern technology watching over their medieval craftsmanship, performing the continuous maintenance of what nobody can see so the beauty remains. Think of it this way. The Magna Carta was an agreement that was crafted, still celebrated to this day, and broken within weeks. And the cathedral is a different kind of covenant, maintained for 9 centuries, not through grand gestures or renewed contracts, but through daily, unglamorous care hidden between the beautiful roof and the beautiful dome ceilings. And it made me think about what I talked about earlier with Matt Rayner and Cuts Transport, the continuous maintenance of a relationship that we have to guard against losing. They have to be willing to maintain it, even when the person isn't there watching to see what's in it for me. Each individual protecting the interests of all. Same with all those beams and all the subsequent beams added to build spacing or fight against prevailing winds or gravity or different shifts underneath in the ground below it. And that's kind of what it feels like trucking has lost, right? That willingness to maintain what we had. We chase self-interest, and we're all paying a cost for it years later as we continue to chase that self-interest. We need a new agreement in this industry, but first we need to recover or rediscover that covenant between ourselves, something that we talk about a lot and fight for in little bits and pieces, but need to build up much stronger than ever before. Or big will continue to screw small. Stop 3 on this journey, but actually occurred a little bit earlier in my journey, was at a place called Ironbridge. Now, I went to Ironbridge before I met with Matt and before going to Lincoln, but I'm telling you about it now because I wanted to talk about the Magna Carta first and put into place kind of these floorboards so we could walk this path together. Now, Ironbridge sits in Shropshire, about an hour northwest of Birmingham. I took an Uber out there too. I'm sure British people just shake their head if they listen to this, going, "What is this idiot? Never heard of a train?" Yes, I know where the trains are, but then you take a train and then you got to go get another Uber because the train doesn't go anywhere near where you want to go. So I just took an Uber straight there and cut out the middleman of the train. And most people go there to see the world's first iron bridge. That's why it's named Iron Bridge, I guess. And it's a beautiful bridge. To quote Trump, it's a wonderful bridge. It's the greatest bridge we've ever seen. Really great people built that bridge. And it's spanning the River Severn. It was built in 1779. Really lovely little town, gift shops, kind of a tourist trap, but it is what it is. Why not? When you got something beautiful, make a buck off it, right? And it's also the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. We learned a lot about the mathematics that put us where we are today from some of the early math there in Ironbridge. We sit in a place now where industrial capitalism could have included human dignity in the equation. Big screwing small became the business model instead of the exception. But it didn't have to be this way. And the people who proved that it didn't have to be this way were the Quakers. The birth of the Industrial Revolution happened in this place as a result of the Darby family. The Darby family, who ended up building the bridge later on, they built and ran the ironworks, and they were Quakers. Abraham Darby figured out how to smelt iron with coke instead of charcoal, and it revolutionized iron production. And when I say revolutionize, during that period, iron was like our plastic. Anything you could think of was made out of iron. And they have a museum up there that shows all of the different products they made, and it just blows your mind. You're like, who the hell would buy something, a dog statue that's 2 feet tall that you might buy off of Temu or Amazon that's made out of plastic and stick it somewhere in your yard or your garden or something, and it might weigh 2 pounds tops. And people were buying cast iron ones because of the innovation that Abraham Darby had figured out. He could do so much more with iron than ever before. You could literally make almost anything with it. And they made a fortune, as you can imagine. His son and his grandson continued on with that business. But here's what's different about how they did it. They did it while paying fair wages when everyone else paid starvation wages. They gave workers Sundays off when 7-day work weeks were standard. They built worker housing that was actually livable. They provided schools for workers' children. They refused any contracts related to weapons or slavery. They treated workers as spiritual equals, not property. And here's something else revolutionary that the Darbys did. They treated women as spiritual and intellectual equals. In the 1700s, women could speak in meetings, run businesses, manage property. The Darby women weren't just wives. They were business partners, educators, decision makers. Sarah Darby ran the household and managed business accounts. Rebecca Darby Smith carried on iron trading after her husband had died. And in an era when women were literally property in most of England, Quaker women in Colebrookdale were teaching, preaching, and running enterprises. The Quakers included half the human race in their mathematics when everyone else was pretending that women didn't count. Think about that. They refused to externalize the intelligence and capability of women the same way they refused to externalize the humanity of their workers. It was all part of the same mathematics to them. Every human being counted, and so every human being got counted. This wasn't charity. The Darbys were successful businessmen and women. They competed against other operations that squeezed every penny from workers, and they won. Same iron, same coal, same technology, just different mathematics. They proved you could make money and treat workers like human beings. You could build industry without building misery. The math worked. So why didn't this model take over? Simple. Big screws small, but fast screws everything. And the exploitative model extracted value faster. Not better, not more sustainably, just faster. While Quaker businesses were building communities, their competitors were strip mining human capital. Guess which approach Wall Street would choose today? Standing at Ironbridge, looking at this monument to what could have been, you realize that we made a choice. At the very birthplace of industrial capitalism, two models, very different, existed side by side, and ultimately the world chose the one that treated humans as externalities because it generates quicker returns. Sound familiar? We have carriers like Cuts Transport that maintain covenant relationships, pay fairly, treat drivers as humans. They exist. They even succeed. But they're not the model that spreads and grows the fastest. Instead, we get a race to the bottom, the exploitation model, because it extracts value faster. Here's what the Quakers understood that we seem to have forgotten or let go of. When you include human dignity in your mathematics, there are no externalities. The worker's well-being, their family stability, their ability to rest, it's all part of the equation. Think about the things that we've externalized. Drivers sleeping in unsafe lots because there's no parking, bodies breaking down from years of 14-hour days, sitting unpaid at the dock for 6 hours, replacing truck stops with travel centers that treat drivers like unwanted necessities. And here's the other thing about the Darbys and the Quaker industrialists. They lived in Colebrookdale with their workers. Not in mansions on the hill looking down, but right there in the community. When your workers' kids play with your kids, when you worship in the same meeting house, when you breathe the same coal dust, you can't externalize their suffering. It's right there with your kids. And you know what's different at companies where it's still a covenant like that? The owners, the executives of those companies, they're that close to their workers too. They're in the yard. They know their drivers' names, their kids' names, their drivers' struggles, side by side, shoulder by shoulder. Because what I think is that distance allows the externalities to appear. When you don't have to see the human cost, it's easy to pretend that it doesn't exist. You just delete that row in the Excel spreadsheet. But when you're living it alongside people, you can't ignore it anymore. And the Darby family at Ironbridge internalized what everybody else was internalizing, and their competition externalized it. The Darby family counted the full cost, paid up front, and still made money. And they proved that when you stop pretending humans are externalities, the math can still work. We did choose a different model because the distance lets people do it. Big screwing small became the business model because big made sure to not live where small lives anymore. But Ironbridge stands there as proof that the mathematics of human dignity is viable. We just have to stop externalizing the costs and count what actually matters. We have to make the math honest. All right, last part in this journey, my trip to Runnymede, where the seed was planted. Now, my last day in London, before I flew back home, I was staying at a Sheraton near Heathrow Airport, and for the heck of it, I just Googled, like, where is this Runnymede place? And lo and behold, it's like an 11-minute taxi ride from my hotel to the place. It's a meadow, right? A massive meadow. And the English love their meadows. So there's trails out through the meadows. There's monuments out in the meadows. And like, I'm not talking about like a park, like a city block. I'm talking about 10,000 steps out to circle the meadow type ordeal. But it was fun. Luckily, it was a beautiful day. It did not rain. So it all worked out. Now, the meadow itself, it's unremarkable. It's just grass and trees along the River Thames, but it's beautiful in its own right. And there's a bunch of memorials out there to tell you a little bit about the Magna Carta and remind us how the mythology around freedom lives on. Now, there's a memorial out there. There's a bunch of them, but one in particular I stopped at, and I'll share some pictures. It was erected by the American Bar Association in 1957. Think about this. We own some land there in Britain with a monument on it. The American Bar Association and American lawyers flew across the Atlantic to build a monument to a document about limiting elite power. The inscription reads, "To commemorate Magna Carta, symbol of freedom under law." And they've kept coming back. 1971, 1985, 2000, 2015 for the 800th anniversary. Lawyers making pilgrimages to celebrate an agreement between elites that failed immediately. The irony is not subtle there. They're celebrating limiting power while benefiting from that same system of power. Hell, look around Washington, D.C. Now that we're done with kings and queens in the world for the most part, the lawyers are the ones writing the system of power vis-a-vis as politicians, while funding and donating to put their names in plaques on monuments celebrating their freedom under the law. And all that seems to be turning out pretty well for lawyers, don't you think? I wonder how that happened. So I stood in that meadow where King John put his seal on the agreement that he had no intention of keeping, which within weeks it was annulled. Within a year, John was dead. Most of the barons who forced him to sign it were dead too, which by any immediate measure was a spectacular failure. But James Allen wrote, and remember our quote, "The oak sleeps in the acorn." The Magna Carta failed in 1215, but the idea that power could be limited, that rulers could be held to written terms, that there could be accountability, that seed was planted there at Runnymede. And 800 years later, every labor law, every constitutional limit, every worker's right traces back to this failed agreement in this unremarkable meadow. So here's what I learned from my UK journey. At Lincoln Castle, I saw how we celebrate elite agreements while forgetting documents that actually freed common people. At Lincoln Cathedral, I learned that covenants require continuous maintenance of what you cannot see. And at Ironbridge, I discovered that different mathematics was possible, where human dignity could be a part of the equation and not an externality. And finally, at Runnymede, I understood that sometimes failure is just success that needs centuries to grow and still needs care and feeding, or it will wither and die. And I realized there that we're at our own Runnymede moment. We need to be mindful that one agreement, one bill is not going to fix everything. And it's not going to happen overnight. Mark Twain told us that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So we need to continue writing new verses that rhyme to this 800-year-old song. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But those who do remember, they get to plant the next generation of better acorns. And it's okay that it's going to take a while. We're truckers. We're used to the long haul. And we've got work to do. Reminder, no interview this week. Let's drop it down to line 4 for a quick break and cap this one off with the post trip. TrueTMS is a cloud-based transportation management system. Being in the cloud makes integrations faster and you're able to access the platform from anywhere. It has intuitive planning, on-demand reporting, and easy order creation, rating, and invoices, which turns tedious admin work into streamlined automated workflows. The folks at TrueTMS have decades of trucking and liquid experience, and they care about this industry. They don't just sell you a product, they're invested in your success. Visit their website, truetms.com, and of course, tell them Channel 19 sent you.
We're talking trucking life, uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories, and the miles in between. From first jobs to last hauls, the laughs that kept us going, and the lessons that left a mark.
Well, villains, that's going to do it for this week's run. Quick shout outs, Matt Rayner and Cuts Transport, of course, for letting me into their world and showing me what Covenant looks like. He's somewhere in Canada right now, just east of the Canadian Rockies, discovering that North America is a hell of a lot bigger than it looks on a map. Don't forget Will Cook and his Facebook page, A Driver's Perspective. Had a great conversation with him again this week. Don't forget Big Cal over at Trucking with Coffee and Cal. And I think he's got a new hashtag, Cruising with Cal. Cruising with Coffee and Cal. I don't know. Cal's good at creating catchy phrases. I might have to enlist his services to help me out. Big update this week. If you saw the posts on Facebook, you're aware. Chris Barber and Tamara Leach, they got their sentences this week. House arrest instead of 7 to 8 years in prison, which is what the Crown wanted. The judge called what the Crown wanted extraordinary and unprecedented, that they even asked for it. There was many times in this long explanation or ruling that the judge seemed like they just wanted to throw the whole thing out on its face, but that's not how it works. So the sentence became house arrest with some exceptions, which is great news to hear. At the end of the day, I think what mattered the most is point number one to both Chris and Tamara was going home. Both of them walking out of that courtroom and being able to go home to their families. And so we're all very, very grateful for that as the starting point of the outcome. We'll see what happens from here, but thankfully they're both on their way home and can maybe start to move on with their lives in some regard beyond waiting to understand what the sentence would be. So thankful for that. Check out Deb Labrie at her website, awomantrucker.com. And thanks to everybody that's fighting out there, trying to be counted instead of externalized. You're planting seeds, whether you know it or not. And before I go this week, one more shout out to everyone that I met in England this trip. From where it all started with the staff at the Blackberry Clinic in Milton Keynes, those crazy blues fans at the Cherry Reds in Birmingham, the amazing staff at the museums at Warwick Castle and Ironbridge, all my wonderful Uber drivers, my beloved villains at Villain Park, the lovely people of Lincoln and of London as well. And I didn't even get to mention what else I did in London on that one day. I went to the British Museum. It's the largest connection of souvenirs from big screwing small in the history of the world. And it's quite amazing to see. Everybody was wonderful to this Yankee who came to visit. Once again, thank you very much for that. Next week on episode number 33, we're going to catch up. There's a lot been going on over the last couple of weeks. The driver shortage narrative continues to work its way in various tangents at breakneck speed. Non-domiciled CDLs, new visas programs, capacity suddenly being tightened, freight rates popping up. Is it real? Is it fake? We don't know. Let's find out. We'll look into more of that next week. And we'll talk to some real truckers about how it feels on the ground. Like I mentioned, look forward to that Will Cook content based on his interview of me. I'm also interviewing with Danielle Spinelli, aka Fraud Girl, who's got a great podcast. I'll post some links, share that out. In the meantime, we're going to start sketching out what our charter of the forest might look like. And it's not just my ideas. Other people have a lot of great ideas to chime in with here, but not what the big interest wants. What do we really need to start to count in all the things that have been externalized over the years and not counted that we've sacrificed as truck drivers and trucking professionals? Keep driving nails. Keep pounding them up through the floorboards. Keep asking those questions. If you want to be a part of the conversation, inbox at channel19experience.com. Don't forget to visit our website, channel19experience.com. Thank you for having me in the jump seat with you one more time. We've got work to do.
This has been the Channel 19 Experience. If it's about trucking, we're talking about it. All uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories. But we talk about the world of trucking today, too. Everything from legislation to lane changes in the industry. We got it covered. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back at the ranch soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on social media at Channel 19 Experience and the website at www.channel19experience.com. That's channel and the numbers 19. See you down the road.